from the UN says temperatures will likely rise by 2.8 degrees Celsius or 5 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century if current policies don't change. That's well above the Paris Agreement goal of keeping warming below about 3.6 degrees, ideally 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. The report came ahead of the UN climate conference called COP27, which began today in Egypt. Joining me to talk about all of this with some surprising good news is Katharine Hayoe. She is a climate scientist at Texas Tech University and author of Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and healing in a divided world. Katharine, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to start with, it is a sort of good news, which is the context of all this that you're often so good at reminding us of. So where were we 20 years ago when people began to think seriously about climate change? What were the predictions then?
20 years ago, we were on a path to at least a 4 degrees Celsius warmer world by the end of the century. And the consequences of that much warming that fast are almost unimaginable, both for human civilization as well as many of the other living things that share this planet with us. It was estimated that 30% of the world's species would go extinct, and we would not be able to function, our water, our food, our agriculture, our infrastructure systems, with that much change in many places around the world. So today, we are still heading for 2.8, and that is still too high, but it is a lot less than we were heading for 20 years ago.
And what have been the major contributors to this decline from where the projection was? We have begun a transition to greener energy, right?
It has begun. As of this year, there are more people around the world working in the clean energy sector than in the fossil fuel sector. We already see transitions in places like the state of Texas, where I live, where over a third of our electricity so far this year has been coming from clean energy. But there's no one thing that's done it. Rather, every country is doing something different. So Norway leads the world in electric vehicle adoption, and they have a target of cutting their emissions 55%. The EU has a Repower EU plan where they're increasing the share of renewables in their power grid. Chile just passed an energy efficiency law. Canada has a price on carbon. The United States, of course, now has the Inflation Reduction Act. So there are many different actions happening all around the world, but all of these add up now to a 2.8 degree warmer world by end of century rather than above 4.
One of the things you have often pointed out is it's not just that we need to do more to reduce emissions. We're also going to have to take out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere because there's already so much up there. There's already so many greenhouse gases up there that in a sense that is baked into the system unless we take it out. So how does one take it out other than planting trees, and are we making any progress?
Well, that's exactly what we have to do. The metaphor I use is a swimming pool. If you think of the atmosphere as a swimming pool, we have natural levels of carbon in the atmosphere that keep us just the perfect temperature for life. But at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we stuck a giant hose into the swimming pool, and that level of water has been going up faster and faster every year. So we have to turn off the hose, but our swimming pool also has a drain. And that drain is nature-based climate solutions. If we can invest in nature to take that carbon out of the atmosphere where we have too much of it and put it back in soils and ecosystems where we want it, that is a massive climate solution that the Nature Conservancy, who I serve as chief scientist, has calculated could take up to 37% of our carbon emissions through putting them back in nature. And of course, it includes tree planting, but it includes a lot more than that. Restoring and protecting degraded ecosystems, restoring and protecting coastlands, coastal wetlands, peatlands, and grasslands, and more. And then I love the smart agricultural solutions like cover crops and regenerative agriculture, where you put that carbon back in the soil where it helps to grow more food, rather, again, than the atmosphere where we have too much of it.
One of the things you talked about was climate inequality, and it feels like that's one of the reasons this meeting is being held in Egypt on the African continent, right?
It absolutely is. When we look at which countries are responsible for all of the heat trapping gases, or most of the heat trapping gases that are causing this problem, and we look at the countries that are most vulnerable to the impacts, it's almost completely the opposite. The 50% poorest people in the world, according to an Oxfam study, have produced 7% of the heat trapping gas emissions that are causing climate to change. Yet when you look at a list of which countries are most exposed to the stronger storms, the more intense droughts, the stronger heat waves and floods that are happening as a result of climate change, right at the top of that list are countries like Malawi, Mozambique, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Not the countries like the United States, Canada, the EU, the UK, and others who have done the most to contribute to the problem historically.
Boy, words of wisdom. Katharine Hayoe, always a pleasure to have you on.
Likewise, thank you.